All right, we are back with a new video, and today we are finally updating the Australian Survivor Power Rankings following week one. And as I expected, there was a lot of movement between the preseason last week and week one after these first three episodes came out. And it's exciting, we can talk about what I got wrong, what I got right, and of course, talking about what I expect to happen moving forward. Let's not waste any more time. Let's jump right into the list. So, starting on the list at number 24, and I guess as a spoiler alert, the first three entries on the list are the first three boots of the season. Obviously, we're ranking these people based on how likely I think it is that they will win the game. And with them being voted out, their chances of winning are essentially zero unless there's some weird twist. But obviously, we can't expect that to happen. So, for now, these people have a 0% chance of winning the game. And at number 24, we have the first boot of the season. We have Andy. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't too surprised Andy was the first boot here. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about his episode, he was him and Kate were the fifth pair to get an intro package. He talks about his time on Champions versus Contenders 2, how his social game was his weakness last time. Now Kate is his secret weapon. He says his strategic ability plus Kate's social game will help him out. Gets a confessional about how people know who he is, meaning he can't lie. We see him tell the truth about his job compared to how he lied about it last time. And obviously, we see Mark saying he's been taking charge at building shelter and coming off as a leader figure, which obviously contributes to his downfall. We see people targeting him. People think that he's the one sort of leading things, which I don't think is exactly true. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of it came down to him trying to play this more relaxed game, but he just ultimately reverted back to his old self, or at least socially. I don't think he did that great of a job to build better social bonds or build that great of a social game. I mean, I don't think it's not that he didn't try, it's more that he just wasn't very effective and people didn't really give him that chance. And I talked about that a bit on my preseason power ranking, how a lot of his success in the game will be determined by how willing people are to give him a chance to be this different person. And while he certainly gave it a shot, it wasn't effective enough to where people were willing to work with him. And I feel through that, he was probably going to be an easy vote regardless. But obviously, the show wanted to prop up Nina. I feel like through that, they really wanted to make this feel like a more consequential vote than it probably ended up being on the actual show. So I think at the end of the day, Andy, like it doesn't surprise me he was the first boot, and I feel like through that, obviously, it was a pretty disappointing run for him on this return. He's here at number 24. Now we're moving on to number 23, and if you watched my preseason power ranking, you're probably thinking that I look like a moron right now. But at number 23, we have the second boot of the season. We have Brianna. Again, I know that I had her a bit high on my preseason power ranking. She was number three, and obviously, we can talk about that now. So, just looking at her run on the show, I mean, in the premiere, she seemed to be doing all right. I mean, she was building a good bond with Shayelle. Obviously, they got an idol clue, and obviously, they sort of conspired to get the idol that was hidden at Tribal. However, obviously, Chrissy beat them to the punch. And then we see Brianna basically try to target Chrissy at this first tribal, really goad her into playing that idol. And that's something that really carries over into the next episode where obviously she's trying to target Chrissy, Chrissy's targeting her. We see Brianna talk a bit about Khan's influence on the tribe. And he goes sort of suggesting that had she stuck around, she might have tried working to get Khan out of the game. And of course, we get multiple people talking about targeting her. She gets her own intro package, which probably wasn't the best sign in the world. I mean, she talks about how she appears non-threatening at first glance, which is contradicted later on with people talking about how big of a threat she is. There's obviously the thing at the reward where she was digging through the fishing gear to try to get an advantage. People saw right through that. And then obviously she's voted out. Now, it's not without her trying. I mean, she was approaching people like Nina and Alex about targeting Chrissy. However, it was ultimately unsuccessful. She was voted out 9-2. And overall, Brianna was someone that came off as very intense and aggressive within the game, which again caused her to fall outside the numbers. I mean, while it was unexplained on the show, the fact that Alex voted for her at the first tribal suggests that she was giving off such an impression right off the bat. But it was only after one easy target went out, that being Andy, that she became the next easiest target. Admittedly, I was too high on her in the preseason. I mean, yes, I liked her quite a bit, even if I felt like there wasn't a ton of information or a ton of feeling that I was getting out of her. I felt like she might have done relatively well. I'm not gonna lie, I did have the thought in my head of her not being quite as high. But on the other hand, I didn't want to put her in this under the radar threat that gets targeted in the pre merge box that I'm faced with when assessing young, attractive, strategically competent women playing this game. I mean, I feel like it would have been a bit lazy in my part if I just dismissed her as that. I wanted to see a bit beyond that, and to be fair, I don't think she exactly fit that description. And I mean, she was targeted in the pre-merge, but I don't think it was because she was seen as under the radar or too likable. I think on the other hand, she just did a pretty bad job of managing her threat level right out the bat. I mean, she was getting so involved with the idol hidden at tribal. I mean, she would have been better off leaving it alone and letting Chrissy take it. I mean, given Chrissy is someone who's inherently more likely to be targeted early than her, and given that Chrissy can be given this perception of someone that doesn't understand the game, letting her grab an idol in front of everyone at tribal was probably her best move. And the fact that she didn't do that, and the fact that she was obviously trying to target Chrissy, is what in turn made it easier for Chrissy to target her moving forward. And also obviously aside from that, there was her searching for advantages, which wasn't too great. So at the end of the day, I was wrong about Brianna. She was playing a lot more aggressively than than what was good for her. I thought she would have had a bit more awareness within the game, but obviously didn't work out for her. She's here at number 23. Now we're moving on to number 22, and we have the third boot of the season. We have Kate. Now, I feel like Kate is someone that did exactly how I thought she would. You know, Obviously, right off the bat, she was paired up with Andy. Like they talked about how Andy needs a better social game, while she was the one who would supply that. And she doesn't really get too much content. I mean, obviously, she loses Andy in episode one. In episode two, she gets a bit more content where obviously she gets a decent amount of focus about how she lost Andy and how she isn't sure what to do at this point. But at the same time, we also hear people talking about targeting her. I mean, for whatever reason, Sam says that Kate was influenced by Andy gameplay wise, and that somehow makes her a threat, which is kind of weird. But obviously, aside from that, we don't really get a sense that Kate's really in on things. Like she does seem like she's kind of on the outs, kind of on her own. And that's really expanded upon in episode three, where again, she's on the outs to the point where David is comfortable splitting the vote between her and Sandra in case Sandra, for whatever reason, had an idol. She doesn't really get that much content there, and obviously, she gets idled out of the game. David plays his idol. She's voted out 3-1. And like I said, she did how I thought she would. Again, she never really built any bonds with anyone, despite being propped up as someone who had this decent social game in her and how she was going to help Andy be better socially. Like, she never really integrates well with her tribe. And despite losing her partner early, which on other Blood versus Water seasons has been a net positive, like as it lowers your threat level, of course, she was still looked at as an easy vote even after Andy went out. I mean, you would think she would have been seen as a potential ally, but that just wasn't meant to be. And even in her boot episode, like she's never really propped up. A lot of her content just felt circumstantial. I mean, in the boot episode, she doesn't really get that much content there, only enough to really establish that she could be the surprise vote out. I mean, she gets a confessional right after the immunity challenge. She's mentioned as a split vote. And I guess it's supposed to be a surprise that she got voted out, but at the end of the day, she never really had that much chance of doing well in the game, and she wasn't really much of a factor for me on the show. She's here at number 22. Okay, with that out of the way, we can now talk about the 21 people still in the game. And like I said, I'm going to be ranking them based on how likely I think it is that they'll win the game. And while I'll talk a bit about their game position, most of this will be based off Edgic, like how much content they've gotten, what type of content they've gotten, and what type of storylines we could expect from them moving forward. But at number 21, the person I think is the least likely to win this season is Josh. Now, the thing about Josh is he's gotten essentially no screen time. I mean, The only thing we really saw from him is in the premiere where Mark describes him as an all-around great guy, but even then we don't really see much from him himself. I mean, he also votes for Alex at Tribal, which goes largely unexplained. And then next two episodes he gets no content, no screen time whatsoever. And obviously, that isn't great. I mean, and when you couple that with the fact that I learned pretty much nothing about him or Jordan from their bio, as again, the website literally has their bios copy pasted. I don't feel that great about Josh. Now, will he be an early boot? I don't think so. I think he seems okay position wise within the game. I feel like he'll probably do all right in the pre merge, but he's just gotten no content and there's no real storyline for him moving forward. I know nothing about him. I don't even know if he's that great of a player. But for here, I think he might do all right. And the main reason I have him below Jordan is that he's on the water tribe or the blue tribe, I guess, where which has gone to tribal more often, and therefore he's had more opportunities to get screen time, but just still hasn't gotten it. So that's a big reason I have him below Jordan, and because of that, I am here at number 21. Now we're moving on to number 20, and we have someone very similar to Josh. It is Josh's loved one, Jordan. And actually, Jordan's gotten even less content than Josh. I mean, no content in the premiere, not even a mention. No content in episode two. In episode three, when they go to Tribal, we hear him briefly talk to Sam about keeping David in the game. He seems to agree. Like, and obviously at Tribal, he's one of the three people to vote for Kate as part of the split vote plan. But again, he's just gotten no content like Josh. Like, we know nothing about him, either from the preseason or from the show, and it's not boding well for him. Now, like Josh, he's in a all right position. I mean, I don't know how he's perceived per se, but he seems to be insulated okay for the time being. But again, we know nothing about him. The only reason I have him above Josh is that he at least has the excuse of being on the red tribe, which has only been to one tribal, whereas Josh has had more opportunities to get screen time and just hasn't gotten it. But at the end of the day, I don't think either of them are winning, although I do think they could potentially make it further along. It's just the fact that they've gotten no content, we know nothing about them, and the show doesn't seem that invested in us learning about them, that he's here at number 20. Now we're moving on to number 19, and we have another person that's pretty invisible in the edit so far, and we have Mel. Now, again, Mel was someone I was pretty high on in the preseason, and I still think there's some potential for her to get more screen time and for her to be this underdog. However, again, she's just been pretty invisible. I mean, the only content we've really seen from her was in episode one, where Nina approached her and KJ about the Andy plan. It's sort of implied that they're a trio, but we've gotten no follow up on that since then. And like her partner Michelle, who we'll be talking about soon, like Mel has had more opportunities to get screen time as her tribe's been to two tribals, whereas Michelle's has only been to one, and yet we still haven't gotten any screen time from them. So because of that, obviously we know very little about them, and it seems like the show just isn't invested in us learning about her, and I would have had her a little higher if she got even a little more screen time in episode two or three. But the fact that the show just doesn't seem that invested in her is a big reason I have her here at number 19. Now we're moving on to number 18, and we have another pretty invisible person, and we have Jay. And like Mel, Jay's been pretty invisible. No content in the premiere, no content in episode two. And in episode three, we only get a very brief conversation where he's talking to Jesse, but even then, it doesn't seem that consequential. And again, Jay's someone I'm not feeling too great about based on this edit. The main reason I have him above Mel is because one, he's only been to one tribal. But the other reason is I feel like Jay is someone who has less potential to be an early boot than Mel. Like, I feel like the thing about Mel is, again, we still don't know that much about her aside from her kind of being close to Nina and KJ. And if that is expanded upon or if that becomes more relevant, then I can easily see Mel moving above Jay. But I feel like until we get evidence to the contrary, I feel like Jay is someone who's inherently better positioned and more likely to make it further in the game than Mel. But at the end of the day, I don't feel great about either of them. So because of that, I have them here at number 18. Now we're moving on to number 17, and we have another person who's been largely invisible through these first three episodes, and you could argue that this person has had even more opportunities to get screen time than Mel or Jay, and just hasn't gotten as much as they should given those opportunities. So you could argue that this person should be a bit lower, but I decided to leave him a bit higher. But I'm still not feeling great. And here we have Alex. Now, obviously, the thing about Alex is, again, not great first week. I mean, pretty invisible in episode 2 and episode 3. But the main reason I have him above Mel and Jay is that he at least got a bit more coverage in episode 1, where we have Mark describing him as the baby of the tribe. He gets injured during the immunity challenge, which is part of the reason why he gets targeted, and he gets a confessional about how excited he and Jay were to play the game, only to get injured. So there's at least something there. However, at the end of the day, like, he still had more opportunities to get screen time, particularly because one, he went to two tribals, but also because he was being targeted at one of those tribals. And obviously, even with that first tribal, I mean, yes, we get that confessional about him being worried about being taken out. And we even hear Nina say that she would talk to him about the Andy plan, but we don't actually see this on screen. We never see on screen Nina talking to Alex about the vote. And he even votes for Brianna at tribal, which in this episode goes completely unexplained. Now, obviously, we see Brianna blow up her game in episode 2, and it's possible that, like, with the way she was coming off, like, as pretty aggressive, that Alex might have picked up on that and wanted to target her as a result. But it's still not a great look that he wasn't included on a plan to save him. We don't really get that much coverage of him saving himself. I mean, obviously, you could argue that that's a bigger knock than not getting any screen time at all. But again, he still got a little bit of screen time, and I wanted to at least give him some benefit of the doubt. But at the end of the day, I'm not feeling too great about him. He doesn't really have much storylines moving forward. And again, aside from the premiere, he's gotten pretty much no content. So because of that, I have him here at number 17. Now we're moving on to number 16, and we have another person who, again, has been pretty quiet in the edit so far, and that is Michelle. Again, no content to premiere, which is pretty bad. I mean, episode 2 and episode 3, she gets a bit more content, where in episode 2, she comforts Kate after the reward challenge over Andy being voted out. And in episode 3, she's with Ben and Sandra when they're talking about blindsiding David. So we do see her a little bit, but we haven't really got any meaningful content. I don't feel too great about Michelle. We don't know much about her actual position on the tribe. I mean, I assume she's more in Sandra's corner than other people. I mean, obviously, given the vote, but even then, we don't actually know that much about how well she's doing, how likely it is that she'll be targeted moving forward. And I'm not feeling too great about her. Although, like I said with Mel, I feel like there is a chance for her to get a bit more screen time later on. And I do want to see them emerge as fun characters, but it's just something we haven't seen. And the fact that we didn't get that much in the first week probably isn't that great of a sign. So, because of that, I have her here at number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15. And I know I dunked on this person a lot in my preseason power ranking. And even now, I'm not feeling too great about them. But like, things are a little better. And here we have Ben. And again, I'm not feeling too great about Ben even after the premiere. No content in the premiere. Got a little bit of content in episode 2, but nothing too crazy. Episode 3, though, is when he gets a bit more screen time. I mean, we finally hear from him in confessional. He's open to blindsiding David as he doesn't want his fate being left in someone else's hands. He approaches Croc with the David plan as well, and obviously, he goes along with it. He talks about how he wants to make big moves and how he's trusting Sandra more and how he wants to be under Sandra's wing. And he feels like David has become a loose cannon since Brianna's elimination. And obviously, from there, he kind of takes the lead with the David plan. And obviously, at Tribal, he votes for Kate for whatever reason. Again, sort of sticking with that split vote plan. It's unclear whether he knew that David might be playing an idol or if there might have been an idol in play, but there was some weirdness going on there. But overall, like, despite having a bit more vocal presence in episode 3, I'm not feeling too great about Ben even now. Now, fortunately, he hasn't really overplayed yet, and it seems like he's been getting along with most of the tribe. But the reason I have him this low is, again, lack of screen time. I mean, no content in the premiere, barely anything in episode 2. Now, something I'll note is that I was watching Yell's intro package in the premiere, and I got this feeling that Ben would be an early boot based off that. I mean, she talks a lot about like how Ben is someone she cares about, and like he kind of seemed like this object. I mean, I don't know if I'm saying makes much sense, but it will. Like I feel like if Shayelle is going to be this big contender, I mean, as we'll be talking about soon, it wouldn't surprise me if Ben ended up being an early boot. And I got that weird sense while watching her intro package. Now, will it happen? I don't know. I mean, we haven't gotten too much evidence of Ben being targeted, as he seems to be in an okay position. But I'm also not crazy about him aligning with Sandra after Sandra talked about how she's used to aligning with big alpha males. And if Sandra remains a prime target for most of the tribe, I could see a world where Ben becomes perceived as her follower, and then certainly by the merge, he'll certainly be viewed as a big physical threat as well. So I feel like either way you slice it, he's probably not going to get to the end of the game. And even edit wise, like I feel like it's not really backing him up. So because of that, I'm here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we have someone pretty similar to Ben, although probably not has much potential for him being an early boot. And here we have Croc. And again, Croc did all right in the premiere. I mean, Chrissy were the third pair to get an intro package. He says he'll tackle the game the same way he tackles rugby. But aside from that, nothing really in the premiere. Episode 2, he asked Sandra if there's a point in the game where people get paranoid. Sort of part of this bigger sequence of everyone on the red tribe getting all paranoid. And then in episode 3, he's approached about the David blind side. Like, so there, and he seems to be on board with it. I mean, he obviously votes for David, although it doesn't really go through, but he's with the majority there. Overall, I feel like Croc is playing how I expected him to. I mean, from what we've seen, he appears to be a leader figure for the tribe, but one that is well respected and well liked. I mean, he's in the majority. Seems like people are willing to come to him to discuss various plans. Now, with that said, I am a bit disappointed by how little screen time he's gotten. I mean, given that he is a professional athlete, I would assume Australian Survivor would do more to prop him up. Right now, his edit feels less like a Matt Rogers and more like a Gavin. Now, obviously, it could go up over time. I mean, the first week isn't the be all end all, like especially if you get at least a little screen time, but it's still not great. I mean, I was expecting him to be a bigger character than he was. I mean, I think he'll have longevity in the game. I don't think he'll end up being a Gavin from Brains versus Brawn, who was taken out very early. But at the same time, I still feel like a lot of the same problems apply where he is his leader figure for the tribe. And even if he does well in the pre merge, I feel like there will come a point post merge where he is targeted. And with Yeda not really backing him up too much, I wouldn't be surprised if that ended up happening. So, because of that, I have him here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and I kind of went back and forth on this because, on one hand, I know that this person is not winning the game, and I feel like this week didn't really do much to shake that. But on the other hand, it seems like they're getting a bit more positivity than I expected, and I feel like there's at least some chance that they could squeak by for a bit. And here we have Sandra, obviously the person everyone wants to know about. I mean, there's quite a lot to say about her. She got a big edit this week. She got a helicopter entrance separate from the rest of the cast, leading into her intro package. I mean, obviously, she talks about being the queen of Survivor and how she's got Nina well. And really, throughout these first 3 episodes, we get quite a bit from her. I mean, gets quite a bit of strategic content, like, and it seems like people are willing to learn from her. I mean, in episode 2, we see Sophie like saying confessional that she wants to learn from Sandra, even as she sees her as a threat. I mean, Jesse talks about her as well. I mean, Sandra gets confessionals about the blood versus water theme and how it's unique from her previous seasons, how Australian Survivor is different from playing Survivor US. I mean, and she shows a decent amount of awareness about how want to take her out. She knows that she's the queen of Survivor. I mean, at the same time, like people are coming to her to ask for advice. They really want to get to know her better. She talks about wanting to blend into the background to minimize her target. Yeah, like, and her reads aren't that terrible. I mean, in episode 3, she picks up on David like getting an idol. Like she suspects that he got something, even with his story about just getting the supplies while Khan was the one to get the idol. She also was the first to target Dave. even before they knew Brianna was voted out, she talks about how if Brianna was voted out, that David wouldn't know much about Survivor. He would be an easy vote to take out over her, which probably isn't the worst strategy in the world. I mean, especially if she wants to stay over someone else, probably easier to lead into an easy vote there. I mean, but obviously David was targeting her in episode 3, and obviously she gets a decent amount of focus in episode 3 when they do go to tribal. Obviously, she's one of the people to put together the David blind side, and she gets people like Michelle on her side and Ben on her side. Ben gets a confessional about how he wants to he wants Sandra to take her under her wing. Yeah, like, and there's a lot of decent stuff there. And they even get the votes to vote out David. But obviously, David plays an idol, which causes Kate to get idled out instead. Sort of crazy how she wasn't idled out of the game herself, but she's obviously at the center of attention here. And I'm not going to lie, I was expecting that coming into the season. I was expecting her to get the bulk of the screen time as she's one of the more notable figures on this cast. So, in theory, it shouldn't really increase her standing too much. However, with all these people getting nothing edits, I mean, I feel like I have to reward that at least to some extent. And again, there's at least some positivity where a lot of her content is strategic. She's talking about how she knows she's this big threat and how she needs to do stuff in order to ensure her longevity in the game. Now, at the end of the day, she's not winning the game. I mean, I still feel like, again, so many people are already talking about how big of a threat she is, even early on. Obviously, you have David. We have people like Sophie and Jesse who, while admiring her, they want to take her out at some point. And I feel like that will be catching up with her at some point. I feel like most people watching this are probably expecting that as well. So, me saying this probably isn't that big of a news. So I think, yeah, Sandra's probably going to be voted out some point. And I guess one could say, well, why is she lower? And I thought about putting her lower. But again, the fact that she at least has the storyline of, like being the queen of Survivor, the fact that she's getting screen time that other people simply are not is enough to leave her there. And plus, I feel like, again, there are people willing to take her at least a little far into the game. And who knows? I mean, if she's able to get to the merge, then she could get further than people expect. But at the end of the day, she's not winning the game. And I feel like I can't really put her too much higher on the list. So I have her here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12. And we have someone pretty similar to Sandra in that I feel like it's unlikely that they'll actually win. But I still feel like they'll be a pretty big character, at least in the short term. And here we have Khan. Now, I talked about Khan a bit in my preseason power ranking about how I expect him to be a big character, and he obviously talked about playing a big game. And we got kind of that in the first week where he was the fourth pair to get an intro package along with Amy. He talks about his time on Master Chef and how people won't be expecting him to be cutthroat. Like at camp, Mark describes him as handy when it comes to camp life, obviously pretty good. And obviously, he's included on the Andy plan. Like he tells Nina that he wants to work with people that he can vibe with. Episode 2, he gets obviously a lot more screen time where both Nina and Brianna start calling him King Khan, where the whole tribe revolves around him. And Brianna says that, like she says that he's playing very hard. We see her talking to Chrissy about possibly targeting Khan down the road. Obviously, Khan talks quite a bit about his own game, talking about how he wants to pull strings without people knowing about it. Obviously, after the immunity challenge, he is sort of taking the charge and making sure that Brianna doesn't get the idol. Obviously, he follows Brianna, and Shayelle as they're looking for the idol. Obviously, after Shayelle finds it, he convinces her to not play it on Brianna, which ends up happening. He kind of gets his way. Although we'll talk about that a bit later when we talk about Shayelle. I don't think that's necessarily a sign that he'll dominate the game, but it's something at least. And in episode 3, again, another pretty big episode for him. I mean, we see Chrissy talked about how loyal she is to him. We see him build a relationship with Mark. I mean, he likes Mark as he's played the game before. Mark seems to like Khan quite a lot. He's pretty complimentary of her. Khan once again has some confessionals talking about how he wants to make big moves. He goes on the reward and gets the idol, the sort of the half idol that can be combined to form a god idol. I mean, it's pretty awkward. I mean, where he asks David to give his half of the idol to him in order to get the super idol, which obviously David wasn't going to end up doing. And then obviously they win the challenge, so not much coming from him there in episode three. But overall, I mean, like I said, Khan's a pretty big character at this point, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was a big character for at least these next couple of episodes. However, I think he is being set up for a downfall at some point. I mean, the way he's already being referred to as King Khan, like, probably not the best thing you want to be called this early in the game. And I feel like, yes, while we get some positivity of people talking about wanting to work with him, like there is going to be a target put on his back at some point. And I feel like someone with Shayel, I mean, yes, Shayel like listens to him and doesn't play the idol. However, I feel like she is being set up for a storyline, or someone else within the game is being set up for a storyline where they take him out. I mean, we saw it with Shayel. I wouldn't be surprised if Nina gets more screen time as well, to where she's the one to take out Khan. In general, when I think of Khan, when I see someone who is going to be this big pre-merge character, it's sort of a big obstacle for the eventual winner, or at least a strong contender to win to take out. And again, I don't know if that's going to come right before the swap. I actually thought that before this latest episode. I thought he was going to be like the Joey figure from Braves versus Braun, where he was taken out right before the swap or even right after the swap. But now, obviously, this last episode was a bit more positive for him. And I think he'll probably turn more into like a Simon or an AK, someone who definitely makes it past the swap section of the game, but is still taken out around the mid game, give or take. I don't really see him getting towards the end of the game. However, I will acknowledge that he has at least some positivity to his game, to where, again, I thought he was going to be taken out right before the swap last time, whereas now I'm a bit more confident that I'll make it at least past that point. But beyond the merge is where things get a bit fuzzy. So because of that, I have him here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11. And I feel like the next three people we'll be talking about are all people who haven't gotten that much screen time in these first three episodes, but people I think have the potential to get more coverage moving forward, and people I think aren't necessarily doomed. And at number 11, we actually have my winner pick for the season. We have KJ. And I was a bit disappointed by the edit she got this week. I mean, yes, her and Sophie were the second pair to get an intro package. Obviously, she's referred to as very sneaky, obviously, someone that knows the game very well. And obviously, in the premiere, we also saw Nina approach her and Mel about the Annie plan. And KJ even says that she wants to work with Nina and Mel moving forward. However, from that, we don't really get anything. And really, we don't get much from KJ the rest of the week. No content in episode two. And then in episode three, she's only shown briefly talking to Shayel about the Brianna vote. So, really, not much there. And I am disappointed by that. And that's a big reason that I have her as low as she is. However, the reason I have her here is that I feel like there's at least some potential that she could get more screen time next week. I mean, we obviously saw Sophie getting considerably more screen time than her, which probably isn't the best sign, but also I'm not fully ready to write off KJ just yet. And I feel like she is someone who's capable enough in the game to maneuver the strategic elements of it. But for now, I have her here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10. And again, we're sticking in this ballpark of people who haven't gotten much screen time, but definitely have more potential moving forward. And here we have Jordy. Now, Jordy's sort of an interesting person to talk about. I mean, they haven't gotten that much screen time, like individually. However, there's definitely some nuggets of positivity there. I mean, him and Jesse were the first pair to get an intro package right at the beginning. He says that Jesse is better to take into battle, while he's better to get a beer with, suggesting that he's good socially. And we see that unfold where it's weird because we have people like Mark and Nina, like they talk about liking Jordy. Like they actively talk about liking Jordy. They think that he's doing pretty well and they are comfortable around him. Like, and obviously that leads to him being in a pretty good in-game position, definitely a solid social player. He's in the majority. And the fact that like the talk of him being liked made the edit does make me a bit hopeful to some extent. But on the other hand, we've heard almost nothing from Jordy himself. Like it's sort of weird where people are talking about Jordy, but Jordy himself isn't weighing in, talking about a social game, and certainly not talking about his thoughts on any of the votes. So that's a big reason I have him relatively lower on this power ranking. However, if he does start getting more screen time, and if it does become apparent that he is playing this great game, then I do remain comfortable about having him relatively higher. But for now, I have him here at number 10. And at number 9, we have someone we literally just mentioned. It's Jesse. Now, obviously, like his partner, the Jordy, like first pair to get an intro package. And admittedly, we've gotten a bit more screen time from Jesse, even though he's only been to one tribal, whereas Jordy's been to two. I mean, he talks about how no one has seen a pairing like him and Jordy play. He gets a confessional at camp talking about how he's starstruck by Sandra. He's a big Survivor fan, but also knows he needs to look out for her. His episode 2 is pretty quiet. And in episode 3, like we see him talk a bit to Sam about the vote, seems to agree that David shouldn't go. He talks to Jay about it, but nothing too much about him. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't feel super great about Jesse either. And really, most of the people we've already talked about, I just don't feel great about in general. That's sort of like how it goes on Australian Survivor, where most of the cast just is very low and it's just a few people at the top. But Jesse is definitely someone who, while he's on the lower end of screen time, has still gotten some stuff going for him. I mean, like I said, him and Jordy were the first to get their intro package. He's gotten to talk about being a fan, and there's at least some setup for him being involved in Sandra's downfall. Obviously, in the premiere, talking about how he knows about Sandra. In this latest episode, with him talking to Sam about whether to vote out David or to vote out someone else, he's definitely not with Sandra on that plan. So it's not like he's got nothing, and there is potential for his screen time to rise. However, at this point, he's been relatively quiet, and because of that, I'm here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8. And before this episode, this person was considerably lower. And even now, I'm not feeling super great about him. But number 8, I decided to put David. Now, like I said, the first two episodes were kind of nothing for him. I mean, no content in the premiere. In episode 2, he and Croc are the ones to start the fire for the tribe. But we literally hear nothing from David about this. Like, he's literally like starting the fire, and yet of all people, Sophie is the one narrating the scene about them starting the fire, which isn't that great of a look for me. And obviously, along in episode 2, he loses Brianna, his daughter. Episode 3 is where things really start to pick up for him. I mean, first he talks to Sam about the previous tribal and how they're probably idols. Sandra identifies him as a fish out of water, and David doesn't know much about Survivor, at least according to Sandra. And like that's he's mainly here because of Brianna, so there's at least some setup for him, like getting this revenge story. But obviously Sandra talks about targeting him. After that, he learns that Brianna was voted out, and we hear Sandra say that he'll be a sitting duck, only for him to get like mobilized by this to where he wants to start taking bigger moves for himself. Obviously, that leads to him wanting to target Sandra, who he sees as the biggest threat. He goes on the reward with Khan, where he gets the half idol, but tries to pass it off like Khan got the idol while he just got supplies. But even then, Sandra's suspicious of him. After the challenge, talks about feeling confident about the possibility of getting a god idol. Sure enough, he pitches the Sandra plan. However, there's suspicion of her having an idol, leading to him agreeing to split the votes between Sandra and Kate. Later on, he gets suspicious when he sees conversations happening. Obviously, Sandra is trying to plot a blind side of him. And then that leads us to tribal, where obviously he plays his idol for himself, which obviously saves him. Now, it's obviously not against his game that he needed the idol in the first place, but he is able to read the room correctly, plays the idol, saves himself, votes out Kate for whatever reason. I guess he stuck with the split vote plan, and yeah, there was quite a lot for him in this episode. Now, David has been interesting to learn about. However, I'm still not feeling too great about him. I mean, like I said, his first two episodes were pretty nothing. And it was only in this episode where it skyrocketed as he's gotten set up for a revenge story following Brianna's elimination. Now, I was actually conflicted in this episode over whether his edit was good or not. Because on one hand, the previous Blood versus Water seasons have been defined by these revenge storylines. Of course, it helps that the winner in both these seasons, spoiler alert, lost their loved ones pretty early on, and thus allowing that storyline to write itself. However, it's inevitable something I'm going to be paying attention to. I mean, obviously, I'm looking at these people who lose their loved ones early and seeing whether they get the storyline. And obviously, Kate didn't really get it. Now she's gone. But now David is the more logical person here, where he's lost Brianna, and we got plenty of that in this episode. So I feel like that's something to his credit, at least. And part of the reason that he's this high. However, on the other hand, I mean, it's he was targeted for one, not particularly great. He had to use his idol, and given how little we saw from him in the first two episodes, it wouldn't have surprised me if this spike in screen time was to tell a one episode downfall story for him. I mean, if he had gone home this episode, it wouldn't have surprised me too much. And even beyond that, like I'm not entirely sure whether this revenge storyline will carry through the rest of the season or not. I mean, obviously, he got a spike in this episode because he was very relevant to the events that happened in the episode. But if that's followed up by him not getting much screen time thereafter, then obviously I'm gonna have to kick him back down. However, if it's followed up by him talking more about Brianna, talking about him growing as a player, learning to play for both of them rather than just for Brianna, and really embracing this revenge storyline, then yeah, he'll probably be a top contender moving forward. So I'm kind of conflicted about him. He's definitely one of these players that I think is still very much in flux. But for now, I'm here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and I kind of weighed in a bit on this one. I mean, it's sort of hard to really tell because, on one hand, I wasn't very confident about this person as a player, and to be fair, I'm still not. But on the other hand, I feel like they'll probably make it decently far, certainly further than Sandra. And here we have Chrissy. Now, like I said, I was very low on Chrissy in the preseason. I felt like she was someone who didn't really know what she was doing, and I felt like a lot of her interview reflected that. And I still kind of feel that way. I mean, even now, like, I don't think this really changed much. However, obviously, she's a big character. I mean, like I said, there's a pretty consistent content over these first three episodes. I mean, if we're going to the premiere first, I mean, she and Croc are the third pair to get an intro package. You know, she talks about learning Survivor as she goes along, talking about being a mother, and her job is to keep everything together. While she doesn't know the game, she insists her competitiveness will keep her in it. Gets a confessional about how underprepared she is for the game, how she doesn't like the outdoors, and how upset she is for being separated from Croc. Describes herself as pretty outspoken. I mean, she finds obviously one of the clues to the idol hidden at tribal. Obviously, she's looked at as a target by Andy initially, alongside Alex, or at least part of the split vote plan. Gets to tribal, is able to beat Brianna and Chayel to the idol, leading to her being targeted to a certain extent. She plays it on herself. Next episode, Brianna targets her, obviously calling her the weakest. She talks to the rest of tribe about it. She says doesn't take much for someone to be against her and that Brianna is on her radar. You know, like Brianna talks about keeping her enemies closer, and we see that scene of them trying to mend things over, but Chrissy calls Brianna too intense, and that really follows Brianna the rest of the episode. She's the main one really going after Brianna there. And at the end, Chrissy gets her way where Brianna goes home. And episode 3 was a bit quiet, more quiet for her. I mean, they obviously don't go to tribal, so they don't doesn't really matter too much. But we still hear a little bit about how she likes Khan a lot and how she feels like Khan has her back. So overall, Chrissy's definitely gotten one of the bigger edits on this season, or at least in the first couple episodes. And I feel like she will be in it for the long haul at this point. That was sort of the dichotomy I had for her going in, where I feel like she's either a very early boot or she's someone who's going to make it very far into the game. And after seeing her in these first couple episodes, I'm inclined to think she'll make it decently far. Again, she's gotten consistent screen time. She was presented as the main force, want to get Brianna out. And even now, we're getting some insight to her relationships, particularly with Khan. Now, game wise, I don't think she's doing the best as her name has been thrown out at both tribals she's attended. and she certainly needs to do more to build bonds with people. But with all that said, I don't think she's winning. I mean, I feel like she's another one of these people that's a big character and will probably make it decently far, but won't actually win at the end. I mean, if you watch Survivor South Africa, Immunity Island, I mean, we saw this with Santoni. Now, I don't know if Chrissy will be as strategic or at least strategically minded as Santoni was, but she's giving me those vibes. She also reminds me a bit of Kara to a certain extent. I mean, I think Chrissy will probably be more active in the game than Kara, but like someone who makes it decently far, but probably doesn't win at the end. So those are all things I'm thinking about with Chrissy. It'll be interesting to see her arc during the season. However, at the end of the day, I don't think she's actually winning. But because she's gotten more consistent screen time than some of these other people, and I feel like she has more longevity than people like Khan or Sandra, I feel like number 7 is a good place for her. And because of that, I have her here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and I debated on this person as well. I could see some people claiming that she could be too high in the list, and I debated about it as well, but I figured number 6 would be a good place to have Amy. Now, Amy's kind of weird because, again, she hasn't really gotten that much screen time. I mean, her and Khan were the fourth pair to get an intro package. She talks about being excited to play the game with Khan and hoping to step out of his shadow at some point. And in the other episodes, she doesn't really get that much content. I mean, no confessionals in the premiere, no content at all in episode 2. And in episode 3, we only see her talk with Sam about the vote, but nothing too meaningful there. So overall, I'm not feeling too great about Amy on the surface. This was not that great of a week for her. But the reason I have her this high is because of, again, what I just mentioned in her intro package. She talks about hoping to step out of Khan's shadow. And I feel like that is a potential storyline that could explain this lack of screen time she's been getting. I mean, obviously, she's only been to one tribal, which could also explain it, but I wouldn't be surprised if in week 2 or week 3 we saw Amy start to get more screen time. Maybe as Khan becomes more of a flawed figure and as he could potentially be targeted, we could see Amy start to step out and start to play her own game. Kind of like what we saw with Erica from Survivor 41 in this most recent season. I think there is potential for her to be here, and there's at least a rational, or at least explanation that I can rationalize for why she hasn't gotten much screen time as of episode 3, which makes me want to put her here at number 6. However, if it turns out to be nothing, then I could see her falling right back down. But for now, I'll leave her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have an interesting person to talk about. I mean, again, this person has been getting relatively consistent screen time, although I'm not too sure how positive or negative it is at this point, but I feel confident enough putting Sam here at number 5. And again, you would expect Sam to get decent amount of screen time as she and Mark are one of the returning players. I mean, obviously in the premiere, she talks quite a bit about meeting Mark on Australian Survivor 2017 and how they were taken out for being a pair, but we don't really get too much aside from that at the premiere. Episode 2, she gets a confessional about how Andy was a strong player and how his style of gameplay influenced her, and that makes Kate a threat. I mean, I mentioned that a bit earlier, but I think that was kind of a ridiculous moment right there. She then gets an individual intro package about being an athlete, like obviously playing Survivor before and having a family with Mark. She wants to pay more attention to people now instead of being paranoid all the time, which is then followed up by her being paranoid. But to be fair, the rest of the tribe it's just more her narrating that point where other people are getting paranoid. So that was kind of a weird moment as well. In episode 3, she gets a confessional about avoiding tribal and how her tribe has been unified, which screamed out to me that they were going to tribal in this episode. Obviously, that ends up happening. She talks to Jesse about the vote and how Ben and Sophie are the main drivers behind the David vote. However, Sam doesn't want David to go. She feels that she has a good connection to him, and she feels like this is one of the few opportunities to take out Sandra. And then at Tribal, she's the only person to vote for Sandra. I mean, not even Jesse votes with her on this one. I mean, and overall, Sam is an interesting person to talk about. I mean, she's gotten this consistent screen time, and she's gotten like weird content that I'm not sure makes her look good or bad. I mean, like I said, there's the Kate moment where she somehow thinks Kate is going to be this outwardly strategic person that tries to play too hard when we never see that on the show. And I have a hard time believing Kate ever did that on the show. That was weird. There was her talking about how she wants to be less paranoid moving forward, but now shortly after, she's narrating a scene about how the rest of the tribe is paranoid. To be fair, that's probably a more positive thing that I'm giving it credit for, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. And then, of course, there was her leading the charge against Sandra, only for that to not really work out. And obviously, her casting her vote for Sandra is probably not the best move for her strategically, as Sandra's the type of person who, oh, well, if one person votes for me, then I'm gonna like turn on you immediately and want to take you out. Like, so obviously, by voting for Sandra, that's probably not the best move for her. Even so, I feel okay about Sam. I mean, I feel like, yes, while some of her content is confusing, she's at least getting a consistent presence. I don't think she's being set up for a downfall anytime soon. I feel like she is genuinely being set up to be a major character on the season. And that's something really going in her favor. Now, there are some knocks. Like, obviously, you could argue that some of her screen time is simply due to her being a returning player, but to be fair, we also saw that with Andy, and obviously he was the first boot. Didn't get too much screen time there. And obviously, there's her relationship with Mark, which doesn't seem to have harmed her so far. And actually, the more I think about it, her targeting Sandra is probably not the best move, as she and Mark are definitely should be one of the bigger targets here. And getting rid of a big target is probably going to put a target on her back. So, probably not the best look at the end of the day. But I'm still interested to see in how Sam does moving forward. And because of that, I have her here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and I'm kind of surprised this person is this high. I mean, obviously, I was kind of low on this person, not because of their inherent ability, but because of their partner going in. But I think so far they've done decently well in the game, all things considered, and their edit seems to be pointing in the right direction. And here we have Nina. I know I had Nina dead last in my preseason power rankings, and I talked about how a lot of that was because of Sandra and how she was probably going to be the target of being Sandra's daughter without the upside of being a meat shield. However, I was never really low on her, like, inherently as a player. I feel like she's good enough socially, good enough physically, good enough strategically to maneuver the game if she didn't have Sandra as her mother, especially not having Sandra in the game. But looking at these first few episodes, I'm actually kind of impressed by how she's playing. I mean, obviously, she, along with Sandra, come into the game through a helicopter. I mean, kind of ridiculous. I mean, obviously, in her intro package, she talks about how Survivor has been a big part of her life and how Sandra taught her to leave morals at the door. Ultimately, she's the one to win the reward challenge as well for her tribe. Good luck there. Now, we do see some people talk about her as a threat. I mean, Mark talks about her as a threat early on. However, she's never seriously targeted during this first round. In fact, the show gives her the bulk of the credit for targeting Andy at this first tribal. Like, she talks about how she wants to play the game her way and how she doesn't want other people to dictate the action. And then we see her like go up to different people. She makes her pitch to Mark and then to Jordy and then to Alex and Josh. Like, she really builds the momentum going. KJ and Mel as well as people she talks to. She really gets the numbers on her side and ultimately gets her way by blindsiding Andy. Now, I talked about this earlier with Andy, but I do question whether how much control Nina really had in the vote. I mean, yes, while she was shown being the one getting all these people together, I feel like Andy just was an inherently easy target anyway, and I feel like he had a good shot being the first boot regardless. However, it's still good that the show is giving her credit for putting this vote together. And in episode 2, again, she gets a confessional about her mom and how she thought about her camp life. I mean, the shelter collapses, like, and Nina fixes it. That's a good look there. She talks about wanting to play her own game as well. She's shown talking to others about the previous tribal in episode 2. She calls everyone in her tribe pretty nice. I mean, we get our thoughts about the different people. She calls out Mark, Alex, and Jordy. However, she's not sure about Khan yet. I mean, and I talked about this a bit earlier with Brianna, how like she also recognizes that the tribe revolves around Khan, and that leads me to think that if Nina really is going to be this big player, that this confessional would be the setup for Nina to take out a pretty big player in Khan down the road. I mean, like I said, I don't think Khan is gonna make it too far into the game, and I wouldn't be surprised if Nina is one of the people that takes him out. I mean, obviously, we'll have to see moving forward whether Nina will be this major figure. However, I feel like the show has done a pretty good job at differentiating her from Sandra. She's gotten some decent content talking about how she wants to play differently from Sandra. And so far, she hasn't seriously been targeted from her tribe despite being Sandra's daughter. Now, will that change with the swap? Who knows? I mean, obviously, if she gets to the swap with Sandra, then that could put her in some danger. And even now, like the fact that I have her at number 4 is kind of wild, but I feel like the edit is there to back her up. So because of that, I have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and like Nina, I'm kind of surprised this person is as high as he is. However, to be fair, I did have him relatively high on my preseason power ranking, and here we have Mark, the other returning player. Obviously, he you would expect him to get some content as he is one of the returning players. Obviously, in the premiere, he talks about meeting Sam on 2017 and how he sees the season as a mission. Gets a confessional about how he and Sam will need to survive separated from each other until the merge. Like, and then at camp, like we see Jordy taking an interest in him. He gets an individual intro package about being a military person. He talks about how intelligence collection is a part of his job and how he's getting to know everyone. Obviously, a lot of this is great stuff. I mean, Nina approaches him with the Andy plan as well. I mean, she calls him very observant. And indeed, it seems that Mark agrees with Nina about Andy being dangerous, and obviously he goes along with the plan to vote out Andy. Episode 2, Nina calls him nice. Brianna talks to him about the previous tribal and targeting Chrissy. And while Brianna goes home, he votes for Chrissy, which probably isn't the best sign either, but like it is what it is. In episode 3, Khan takes an interest in working with him as well. Obviously, they form an alliance together. I mean, Mark agrees to it, saying he connects with him, but not to the point where it's obvious to everyone. And through that, he has a confessional calling Khan the king of the tribe and how he's a great player for working with him. He then says he wants to stay in his corner as well. So overall, I feel pretty good about Mark. I mean, it's probably not the best move for him to be building an alliance with Khan, or at least, I mean, it's a good move, but I wouldn't say that it should be his primary strategy. I could definitely see him turning on Khan at some point down the road. And it seems like he has a pretty decent relationship with the rest of his tribe. I mean, and the show goes out of its way to highlight that. I mean, we have people like Nina and Jordy being complimentary of him, and I feel like he seems pretty well positioned. I mean, he's obviously looked at like pretty favorably by the tribe, and the edit seems to be backing him up, giving him a consistent presence, but nothing that's too overbearing. I could see him definitely merging as a big character down the road. Now, is there a downside? Yes. I mean, I feel like if he does stick true to this like con alliance that he could get blindsided. I also feel like just him inherently being this big physical guy could lead him to be being targeted if he makes a deep run. However, I feel like he's doing a lot of what he needs to do. I mean, he is being better socially. I mean, people are liking him. People want to work with him. And I think that's all very good for him. I think the show also goes out of its way to highlight that like he knows what's going on around the tribe, that he cares about people, that he's paying attention. And obviously, those are all things that make him a pretty well rounded figure. So, because of that, I am relatively high on Mark for the moment. Now, obviously, things could change moving forward. But for now, I feel number 3 is a reasonable spot to put him. At number 2, the person I think is the second most likely to win Australian Survivor at this point for me is Sophie. Now, it's sort of weird as I pick KJ as my winner pick, and I talked about Sophie as being okay. I mean, obviously, I talked about her having some troubles early on, but wasn't like super low either. Like, I think I put her in the middle of the pack. But obviously, I feel like unlike KJ, who has gotten pretty minimal content to this point, Sophie has gotten relatively consistent content. I mean, her and KJ are the second pair to get a package in the introduction scene. She talks about being very direct, that she's a very love or hate figure, and obviously she talks about KJ and how she's going to be effective in the game. She gets her own individual intro package talking about how she's an alpha personality, how she's pretty successful in her career, how she'll need to keep her mouth shut to keep the target off her back. Obviously, pretty good that we're getting an intro package from her in the premiere. And obviously, that leads into episode two, where obviously there she's the one narrating the scene where her dress gets fire, despite her not actually being the one to start it. I mean, we see that it's Croc and David who are starting the fire, but for whatever reason, Sophie's the one narrating that scene. And I don't know how much that reveals about her as a character, but I just thought it was something interesting. She also gets a scene where she talks to Sandra, and Sandra's someone she wants to learn to, which is followed up by confessional, where she talks about how Sandra is an special opportunity for her where she can learn a lot about the game, but she also knows Sandra is a threat, so that's pretty good on her. And admittedly, she didn't get anything in episode three, but we do at least hear Sam and Jesse talk about how it's her and Ben that want to target David, which sort of implies she's in a good in game position. But overall, I'm liking Sophie a lot. I mean, yes, her episode three was pretty quiet. She got some decent content in the first two episodes, which I think are more important. I mean, and I feel pretty good about her continuing to get consistent content moving forward. However, there is one person I feel more confident in being the winner pick at this point, so I have her here at number two. And now at number one, the person I think is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Blood versus Water at this point is Shayelle. Now, I know some people may think this is a weird pick, as yeah, she got some screen time, but it's not like she got as much as people like Khan or Sandra or even Nina. And obviously, Australian Survivor has his reputation at this point for producing obvious winner edits. However, I feel like Shayelle got enough in these first three episodes to where she is established as a character, but also has the potential to blow up screen time wise. I mean, just looking at the premiere, I mean, she gets her own individual intro package. She talks about her relationship with Ben, who I talked about earlier as having the potential to be an early boot. I don't know, it just gave me that vibe, but that's beside the point. She talks about bonding with Brianna, even while recognizing that Brianna could be a threat later on. She finds a clue to the idol hidden at Tribal, tells Brianna about it. She goes to grab it at Tribal, but obviously Christopher beats her to it. In episode two, Shayelle wonders how Ben and the loved ones on the other tribe are doing, leading her to leading a yoga session, which she feels will build stronger bonds. That's a pretty good scene right there. She goes idol hunting with Brianna and Lee at the tribal and obviously finds it. However, others walk in and Khan tells her to not play for Brianna. She feels stuck between voting for Brianna or Chrissy. And obviously, we see at tribal that she does not play the idol. And I know some people may view that as a knock. However, I actually think it's a strength because, again, I talked about earlier how I see Khan as being this big pre-merge figure that could eventually be taken down either right after the swap or right before the merge by someone who will eventually be the winner of the season or at least a very strong contender to win. And I know I talked about Nina as potentially being someone to do that. However, if it's not Nina, I think Shayelle is very well poised to do it as well. I feel like her not playing the idol is something that could be used to explain later that she was just biding her time until she needed to make a big move or the time was right. And obviously that time could come later. And, we don't get that in episode three, but, like they didn't go to the tribal in that episode. So it didn't really make much sense. But basically, the way I see Shayelle playing is I feel like she's a very good all-around player, and I know I placed her at number 10 on my preseason power ranking, but I feel like a lot of the reason I had her that low was because of Ben and how Ben could potentially tank her game. But obviously now we're seeing how things are playing out, and I actually think Chael has it in her to pull it out. I feel like I regret not putting her higher and letting her connection to Ben drag her down as much as it did in the ranking. And Like people talk a lot about the obvious winner edit in Australian Survivor, how it's been the trend the last couple seasons. And I think the season will continue to follow that trend. I feel like there is going to be a pretty obvious winner edit by the end of it. It's just a matter of when that will emerge. And when I think of Shayelle, I'm thinking of Haley from last season, Brains versus Braun. I mean, a lot of people talk about how obvious Haley's winner edit was. However, if you actually pay attention, she actually wasn't that prominent the first 2 weeks. I mean, her first week, it again wasn't too pronounced. She got just enough to teach us who she is and like what she's all about, but it wasn't that focused on in those first 3 episodes. And really, the second week, like episodes 4 through 6, she was barely in it at all. It was a pretty bad week for her. It was only in episode 7, the beginning of week 7 of week 3, I should say, that Haley's edit really skyrocketed and people started calling her the obvious winner at that point. I feel like Shiel has a lot of potential to follow a similar trajectory where she gets just enough early on to establish her, or at least set her apart from all these people with nothing edits that we were talking about lower on the list, but then really explode, like maybe not right away or next week, but certainly the week after or later in the pre merge, really explode and start to play this good game, be more relevant in the story, and really hog up all the screen time. So I know I might be reading too much into this, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. However, I think JL has a lot of potential to follow the Haley edit. And if that's the case, then that gives me a lot of faith that JL could be the winner of the season. You couple that with my thoughts on her as a player and how Ben doesn't seem to be dragging her down that much. I mean, if anything, I'd be interested to see how she would react or how the edit would react if Ben was an early boot. I mean, so there's so many possibilities for Shale at this point. Again, if I turn out to be wrong, then I'll admit it. But for now, with everything going on, I think Shale has the best shot of winning Australian Survivor Blood versus Water. And there we go. That will do it for this week's power rankings for Australian Survivor Blood versus Water. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. I plan to come back next week after we get the next 3 episodes of the show and hopefully make some interesting updates to it. I'll also be covering Amazing Race as usual. Celebrity Big Brother has started already, which is very exciting. And yeah, I'll be around to cover those shows. But for now, that is the video. See ya.